Hi, my friends. Leo Babauta from Zen Habits here. So good to be here with you. In this video, we're going to talk about getting comfortable in your own skin, being comfortable with your own body, with yourself. Now, why is this important? Actually, it's very, very, very important. And again, this is one of these topics that is under talked about, underappreciated. Most people are not comfortable with themselves. Most people are not comfortable in their bodies. Most people are not comfortable in their own skin. And so as a result, they don't like the way they look. They do all kinds of things to try and change their appearance because they're unhappy with themselves. They don't like the way they feel about themselves. And so they try and do things like shop a lot, play video games and distract themselves, go on social media. They do all kinds of things to try and distract themselves from how uncomfortable they feel about themselves. They might try and hide themselves so they don't get seen. Um, they don't want to be seen. It's uncomfortable being seen in front of others, which means that they lose opportunities. They lose social connections. They might become more lonely. Um, they might overeat because they're feeling bad about themselves, and then they'll feel even worse because this is making my body look worse. I don't really believe that, but that's the inner thinking process. And so now they feel worse about themselves, and so then they overeat. It might not be overeating. It might be alcohol. It might be, marijuana or other drugs. It could be, whatever it is we do to get away from our uncomfortable feelings about ourselves. This is an unseen factor in most of our lives. If you can get comfortable with yourself, so much of our anxiety, our negative self-talk, our needing to numb ourselves, comfort ourselves, run away, exit, avoid, procrastinate, all of these things start to go away because we can simply be comfortable in our own skin. This is the ultimate minimalist hack because if you can get comfortable in your own skin, you don't need to buy anything to try and cover that up. You don't need to, like prove that there's something good about you through, you know, having fancy clothes or a fancy car or a fancy house or a fancy job or a fancy whatever. You can save so much money just not having to do any of that. You don't have to try and get into a room and prove your worth to others because you are already confident in that. So hopefully I've done a decent job of helping you to understand that. There's a question of how is it that we become like this? And I'm not going to go too deep into that because that's a very deep topic. Um, but some of it I think is fairly obvious. We become uncomfortable in our skin because of society's norms. So, for example, if you are a darker skinned person, there's um, a decent chance that if you're living in a Western society, that you are not seen as the ideal way to look. That maybe you're teased for your darkness. Or maybe you're told you should try and like not stay in the sun and get lighter. Or maybe you're just discriminated against in 1,000, 10,000 different ways that people don't even realize they're doing because of your skin color. So there's skin color that is just, this is how people see me. But there's also body types. Maybe you don't have the perfect body type. Now, there are people who walk around with like the ideal body type according to our society's standards. But there's even more people, way more people, who walk around without that. And when you walk around, let's say, with an overweight body type or an underweight body type or a weird, different shape body type that isn't, like Hollywood standards, or the Paris Fashion Week standard. I don't know where the standards come from, but you know what I'm talking about, the magazine covers. If it's not by those standards, then we start to criticize ourselves. And this has only been accelerated by social media. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of these things make us feel worse about ourselves because we see all these amazing looking people really getting all these likes and then, me not looking like that, you know, not having hair, is one. And people tease you for not having hair. It's really acceptable in society to tease people for being bald, for being overweight, for being, having too many freckles or too many splotches on your skin or too, like hunched over or having too much belly fat or whatever it is. There's a lot of things outside of us. It might have been that our parents criticized us. It might have been that we were bullied as kids. So there's a lot of possible reasons, but what happens is that we internally criticize ourselves. If I can criticize myself more than anybody else, I can protect myself from their criticism. Maybe then I can start to do something about it so that I don't look like this or do something so that I can distract others or protect myself in some way. It is unsafe to just look like I am. So you can see that this becomes an internalized view, an internalized mental habit out of protection. Now, I don't blame anyone who has this. I haven't even really gone that deep into the whys of it and what happens and how we get bullied or teased or little comments here and there. I haven't gotten into any of that. The images we see on TV and the big screen and magazines and blah, 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 blah. There's so much to go into here, and I'm not an expert in all of that. But what I will say is all of this has an effect to the point that we just don't feel comfortable with who we are. Now, there's a lot of other things besides looks. There's just like your personality. You start to have, there's the same effects on your personality. I feel a little bit different. I'm a little bit darker inwardly than other people. I have darker thoughts. I'm not like always cheerful. That's an example. But there's others. I'm more awkward socially, or whatever. So all of this goes to the effect of I don't feel comfortable with who I am. My personality, my looks, my skin color, my gender, my sexuality and gender identity, um, you know, any of it could lead to me just not being comfortable with who I am, not being comfortable with my body, not being comfortable in my own skin. Okay, I talked a little bit about the effects of it. We won't go deep into that either. What we're going to talk about is how to actually start to shift that. Let's imagine you understand everything that I just said, and you're like, yep, totally get it. You don't need to go too deep into that. How do I change it? Okay, this is not an easy one, so I'm going to give you a few different strategies that I think are helpful. I'll talk about my own strategies that I've used. So first of all, there is no amount of doing stuff, of buying stuff, of avoiding stuff that's going to actually help you to feel more comfortable with yourself. So none of that actually works. What does work is shifting your inner view. So any way that you can notice that you're being critical, judgmental, or just non-accepting of yourself, we want to just notice that. Be curious, like, ooh, yeah, I'm like constantly criticizing this like mole on my cheek, or pock marks from my pimples from the olden days, or maybe some wrinkles on my forehead, or crow's feet, or like my skin's wrinkly, or whatever it is, right? My hair or lack of it. There's a lot of things that I might start to criticize. I'm like, ooh, I don't like that. So like, let's imagine you looked at a photo of yourself on your phone and you're like, ooh, I don't like that. Ooh, like I don't like the way that my teeth look. Start to just notice that. And you're like, ooh, that's not so loving. That's not so accepting, right? That's interesting, right? We don't need to be judging of that. We just kind of be curious about it. Like, oh yeah, I can see that there. I could see why this makes me uncomfortable. And, socially as well. Imagine you go into a room with a bunch of other people. Notice your discomfort. What are you afraid they might think about you? What are you afraid you might get judged as, or criticized as, or teased as? Start to be curious about that because there's something that's making you uncomfortable. It's not just because there's other people in the room, it's because there's something about you that you're afraid that they'll notice. What is it? And once you start to notice all of this stuff, and there's a lot of other things you could notice. So just notice everywhere that you're critical of yourself, judgmental, non-accepting. Start to notice all of these things. What is it that you don't like about yourself? And what we want to do is start to then, step 2 is start to just get more comfortable. It's like if you wanted to train yourself to get into cold water, well, maybe you just practice being in cold water a little bit, just a little bit at first. Try and dip your toes in, and then I'll go up to your knees at one point, and then your whole body, but just for a few seconds, and then tomorrow maybe a little longer, and then like we have some exposure training there, and eventually you actually can just slip into the cold water, and it's not so bad. Breathe a little bit. We want to do the same kind of thing with our face, with our bodies, with our skin, with our personality. So whatever it is you're critical about, if you're like, oh, that mole, just kind of like gaze into the mirror and like let yourself be curious about that mole. What is it that is kind of interesting about it? Like what is it that's like kind of beautiful about it? Can you find the beauty in these things? How can you start to accept that that's a unique part of who you are? Maybe it's not the mole. Maybe you're like, oh, there's this other mole over here. Maybe it's like, I don't like the way my earlobe looks, or my eyebrows are too thick, or my eyes are too slanted. Okay, let's look at that. Like what's beautiful about that? How can you see it in the most loving, accepting way? Oh, these freckles in my nose. So I'm looking at my face right now. So that's why I'm talking about those examples. But you can do the same thing with your belly, with your legs, with your knees. You can do the same thing with your awkward personality. Can you like start to appreciate the awkwardness of it? And it's like, ooh, don't know what to say. And kind of like be friendly with that and loving. Imagine if you had a little kid and they were critical of themselves. How would you be towards them? Could you be friendly and loving and accepting of that little kid? Like, oh man, yeah, you don't like the way your hair looks. I totally get that. Like, but I actually think it's beautiful, your hair. And start to like really, as you might do for this little kid, really loving them and accepting them and seeing the beauty in them that they can't see in themselves. Do the same kind of thing for yourself. This takes some time, and it's going to feel really weird at first, silly even, wrong even. Like, no, I don't want to like that about myself, then I'll never change it. Notice in that the fear that if I accept this about myself, I will never do better. This is the same fear of the voice that's self-critical when we're not productive, or we're not doing our habits. We're hoping by criticizing ourselves, we will do better. It's the same thing. If I'm accepting of this belly, I will never do better. Well, yeah, in that assumption is that there's something wrong with your belly. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do the things that are going to make us healthy. If you're like, yeah, but I'm going to have diabetes in 10 years if I don't do something. Well, okay, work towards, being healthy. Be active every day. Start eating healthier. Those are good things, but don't do it because you have a belly. That's not the reason. Do it because this is going to be a loving, kind, healthy act for yourself, not because you want to get rid of this ugly belly. And so we want to just love the belly, but still love ourselves through taking healthy actions. I'm not going to go much further into it, but I'd love for you to try it and let me know how it works. What's getting in the way for you? What questions do you have? What objections do you have? Put them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And I can do a part 2 if you have some questions, objections, failings that you can share with me in the comments. If you found this helpful, please give this a like. Give this a subscribe. I'd love for you to continue to be a part of this Zen Habits community here on YouTube. And share the video with others if you think that they could use this. I think everybody could use some work on being comfortable in our own skin, because what a beautiful thing. Once we've done that, life becomes actually so much nicer. So I wish that for you and for your loved ones. This is Leah Babauta from Zen Habits saying goodbye. I'm wishing you comfort and love in your own skin with who you are. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.